meet Medusa. So who is Medusa? And I'll start by saying I went to all of my tarot books and oracle books that I bought of reference libraries, and not a single one of the over a dozen that I have reference Medusa.
That's strange.
That's very strange. And, I've got ones that are explicitly about all of the Greco-Roman myths, and they've got the gods broken down with here's the origin gods, the Titans and the Olympians and the significant heroes and the magical beings, and I'm like, well, where the hell's Medusa? Yeah. And I just think that's kind of a beautiful start to understanding Medusa. The Medusa is what is often, in our personal experience, is not seen. So it's gone numb. It's the shock and the wounding and that paralysis that comes from great trauma that's turned us to stone. Like Medusa, the very popular level is known as the look of her face and through her eyes will turn men to stone. And only men, but it can also be the masculine within all of us. Yeah? And that's where we go numb. Yeah? And men, the masculine brings us into numbness and that kind of the shock, often associated with war and violence and aggression. So the next layer is that it stays hidden, and Medusa in our lives often stays hidden because it utterly terrifies us. It's like this primary terror, and it's the last thing we want to look at. That's certainly my experience of encountering Medusa. A huge, overwhelming state of terror, even to start to try to turn to face the full sort of sense of what's there, even though I don't know. Right? It's so unconscious. But let's go back to the meaning of Medusa's name. You could say the meaning of the word literally is the guardian. So she's often known as the great protector, instead of in the feminine sense, and in the present verb, the Median, to protect and rule over. And the Pi root is med, to take appropriate measures. So she's actually this active or yang feminine energy. And again, there's that layering in of, I will call it the yang or the masculine, but put yang in there because I think taking out of gender helps us get access to it. That she is often that yang energy to protect, to take the measures that are appropriate, to sort of guard ourselves and our softer feminine natures. She's often then gone numb and absent and turned to stone. So she's overly rigid and no feeling happening, which is also then very ineffective protection. But it's a classic move. You think about what happens when we go into shock and numbness. It's a natural defense mechanism. So Medusa is the protectress of the sacred feminine mysteries, or the yin mysteries within all of us. And by that I take it to mean the innocent, youthful sensuality and all of the power that's in that. All of that power of youth, if you think back to your sexuality coming online, just how rich and magical and potent it was, and just how easily the energy can come up and create and connect. And it also is so delicate and subtle, exquisitely tender and fresh and captivating, and that quickly gets deadened and numbed, and if it's not well protected, it's not a really good Medusa container. So I guess in pop culture and even through the feminist discourse these days, to some degree, it's easy to take Medusa simplistically, and by that I mean to look at one facet of her complex nature, a complex mythos, and take it as the total picture of her and derive all meaning from it. So, Medusa's the evil monster. Look, there she's got snakes for her hair. Who else is that ugly and horrific? She's the monster and it's evil and she's the sign of evil and off you go. Or the mirror of that, she's the protector. She wards off evil. She's on the placard or the shields to be able to be a defense against oncoming warriors and often the aggressive masculine or the aggressive yang. But she's both of these things. She is the monster and she is the protector and she's a whole lot more. So again, we've got this multifaceted, multi-layered, paradoxical archetype or aspect of ourselves and existence to encounter. And for me, the encounter and the sort of logic that helps grant access to a connection with Medusa and to unfold her gifts is to see that she is a transformative being and a transformative archetype. And to even contemplate the story of Medusa, which you are by hearing this, is a transformational journey. So listening, even if you're just passively listening to this myth, it is dynamic in its impact potentially and how it will unfold within you. So, what is the myth? Well, like all good stories, we'll come back and start at the origin. And Medusa is the only mortal of 3 Gorgon sisters. Now, Gorgon means literally the fierce, terrible, and grim. Right? So there's the ugly monster for you. And the simplistic interpretation, of course, is, yes, if the feminine is enraged, it's just ugly. Masculine rage can be celebrated as war and heroic and warriors and sports accomplishments, but classically not the feminine. That's just fierce, terrible, and grim or ugly. Some would say that she didn't really have 2 sisters. They were just part of the classic habit of putting a 3-part, the 3 phases to the goddess together. And there is a dimension there. People will go into Medusa and look at the sisters and see they have different aspects and they're really part of the one story or the one being. It hasn't felt strong enough for me to really go into that, but it's just a note that it's there. Their parents, there's a little bit of a debate. The mother's very clear, it's Seto, and whether the father is Gorgon or Perseus, sort of depends on which versions of the myths you read. And what is clear is there is a common nature of the parents, and this is, I think, what's psychologically, mythologically, archetypally relevant to us today, that they're chthonic, which means subterranean monsters from the archaic world. Right? So it's speaking to our primitive roots, literally as sea creatures, perhaps, crawling up through evolution. And so they're usually the parents are usually cast as sea gods and goddesses, and often depicted as siblings. So incestuous siblings. So the subterranean nature is obviously pointing to the unconscious. The fact they're of the water and the seas is indicating the emotions. The fact that the parents are siblings point to pretty unhealthy family dynamics right from the get-go. And this gives rise to, guess what? Terrible children. Okay? So we have this unconscious, archaic way of being where brother slept with sister and kind of not thinking, and it's messy and it results in bad kids. So at one level it's a good lesson in procreation and healthy evolution. Right? At another level it's speaking again to the kind of family dynamics that create our own Medusa experiences, our own pain and numbness. All right, with that framing in there, probably the other point of variation in the myths, the origin is either Medusa is born ugly and she's born with snakes and grim and fierce and described as having girded with serpents, vibrating tongues, gnashing her teeth, with big wings and brazen claws and so on. Right? So all the things of a horrible demon. However, the myth that has most taken hold says actually she was ravishingly beautiful. So she was this gorgeous, enchanting maiden, right? Full in her sexuality and her potency, big long locks of luscious hair, such that even the nymphs and the gods were entranced and like, ooh, would like to be with that, want to connect and unify with her. As one author put it, the jealous aspiration of many suitors. And that she only came to be the Medusa, the gorgonic one with the snakes and the wings, as part of her fate. So, let's talk about that fate. If she was cursed, how did she get cursed? How did she transform from the most beautiful woman ever into the most ugly? So obviously, as I was saying, she's described as this beautiful, enchanting being with amazing influence on men. And you could say she had no compunction about that. She had no qualms about that. She was totally self-confident, possessed, and happy about that. The negative framing is that she was a bit bold or vain about it. So whether it's vanity or actually just really unguarded, healthy self-possession and sense of self-worth, I don't know, depends on which side you're looking from. Some would say she was just vain and young and didn't know any better about where to not flaunt her natural abundance of beauty and gifts. And you can hear the kind of Victorian era age, as I think of it, but obviously it's been around a lot longer, crimping down and shutting down and hiding away the beauty, lest it incite arousal in the men or jealousy in the women or cause trouble, right? Today you might think about burqas in a similar light, chosen or not. At any rate, Athena and Pallas Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, handicraft, warfare, very much the wisdom and of the mind, the mental feminine goddess, the yin quality of mind. She's getting older and her beauty was waning. And so one version of the story is out of her jealousy, she curses Medusa with a head of snakes, replacing her lovely locks of hair with ugly, threatening snakes. Again, the symbolism of the snake, of life force and sexuality, having this twofold nature. It symbolises the potency of it, and it can be a deadly thing if it bites you and it's threatening. Anne cursed her that men would turn to stone if they looked in her eyes. So any chance then of there actually being love and intimacy and connection is scuttled right there. Ovid relates, however, that this once beautiful mortal was punished by Athena because of a very different reason. And that is that Poseidon, the god of the ocean and seas of water, met with Medusa and so, taken by her, took her in Athena's temple. And one version of the story is that Medusa was raped by Poseidon. So she was overcome or overwhelmed by this deeper, watery, emotional, masculine nature. And in effect then Athena's blaming the rape victim for being raped. Like, you shouldn't have been there, you shouldn't have been doing what you were doing, you shouldn't have been looking so damn good, you should cover it up and put more clothes on, this kind of thing. How could Poseidon help himself? Right? As the patriarchy sort of logic would write off the responsibility. And on the other side, it's, maybe Medusa was very happy, thank you very much. And this was exactly what she wanted. And maybe that's why the old and cast aside or left aside Athena was even more jealous and struck her revenge. So just to really spell it out at a kind of archetypal psychological interpretation level, we have the bold and the beautiful Medusa serving the kind of unemotional, i.e. the intellectual goddess of wisdom Athena, who, by the way, was conceived through the thought of or born of the brow of Zeus, right? So it's a mind-born goddess. And in comes Poseidon or Neptune, the ruler of all the oceans, being water and emotion, the physical and metaphysical, so instinct and the unconscious. And you could say that, wisdom and strategy, the conscious mind is actually portrayed by the primal power of the unconscious and the emotional. And it's either kind of willingly done, so our sexuality and our beautiful feminine, sacred, subtle energies willingly overwhelm us, and we let them overwhelm us and to come into union with our instinct and the unconscious, or it overwhelms us and we're engulfed in the unconsciousness. So there's an interesting play there, and I have the image of the ocean rolling over us, which at one time can be thrilling, or it can be, oh my God, I can't breathe, and one seems chosen and not. And if you're standing in the ocean, that experience can happen one way and then the other very quickly. So I chose to be here, I didn't choose to be drowning, what's going on? So this is the territory that Medusa with Poseidon and Neptune leads us into. So either way, you would sum it up as the story of a young feminine beauty, her beauty and confidence being punished by the older sort of crone woman. And what happens from that is that Medusa's rage at what happens to her isn't directed at Athena. It's actually directed towards men and to the yang, to the masculine. And it's so that common want of Athena and Medusa was the attention of the instinct and the embodied masculine, beside the Neptune. And so it's kind of turned back there. It's almost, you could see that Medusa's desire and sexuality has gone sour. It's kind of led her to get treated this way and be cursed. So the object of that affection should then be blamed. Right? It may not make complete sense, but that's kind of the psyche, emotional logic that gets played out. Or she was raped and she's pissed at the man because she was raped. And then bloody Athena's cursed her on top of it. Damn that man. Either way, the older and younger feminine are not actually looking at the source of their pain and how they're treating each other. Yeah. So there's something here for the mother-daughter relationship, or that feminine to feminine relationship in all of us. If I think about how men, actual males with their yin nature, treat other males' yin nature, it's pretty darn abusive. Yeah. And it sounds very much like Athena. It's got those echoes. So again, just to try to get our agenda to see it from both sides, at the very least. So from there, with a head full of snakes and any man she looks at turning to stone, Medusa, of course, ran away and hid herself. And you could say then, it's like after this kind of wounding and after the sense of being cursed, it's to retreat and hide away and isolate. How often after wounding do people go and isolate themselves? It's also symbolic, I think, of that numbness, the shutting down, where we no longer see or feel what's actually there. Okay, and now enter Perseus, our hero. So in a complex and overlapping series of tales, Perseus is sent to kill Medusa, first to find her and then to actually kill her. But he was sent with the expectation he would die in the process, right? So he's a youthful, godlike hero, and for me this signifies both like the naive, numb to the reality of the emotional scope that's in front of him, kind of yang youth, masculine youth, but also speaks to this kind of heroic effort that's actually required to go and find Medusa and actually deal with her and actually relate to her, or kill her, confront her. And it is quite the tale. The short version goes something like this. So Perseus is the son of Zeus, an actual god, and a mortal woman known as Danae. And Danae is the only child and daughter of King Perseus of Argos, Perseus' grandfather. So Perseus and his mother have been cast into the sea by his grandfather because Apollo, or a Delphic oracle, had prophesied that Perseus would kill him. So they were then taken under the protection of the king Polydeuces, I can't pronounce that properly. And this king fell in love with his mother and resolved to kill Perseus because he objected to their union. So another twist and another little refracted look at the love of a man and a woman, and who's objecting. This time it's the young masculine. People are objecting to love all over the place. Anyway, there's a whole saga of how it came about, but Perseus ends up being sent by Polydeuces on this seemingly fatal quest to go and kill Medusa. His mother, Danae, realised that her headstrong son was in over his head. And so headstrong led with this sort of the idea that it should be fine, naive to the unconscious, the fullness of the emotional reality and how terrifying Medusa could be, was in over his head, that ocean's crashing over him, or going to very shortly, the mother's wisdom could see. So she's crying out to Zeus, hey, help this, right? And Zeus, the father, decides to do that and orders support for him. So Perseus was able to eventually find and slay Medusa with the help of the Graeae, the three crones who shared an eye between them and who knew the secrets of the future. Athene, who originally cursed Medusa, was forced by Zeus to give him a magic shield that he could look into to avoid staring at her eyes directly. And there's something here about we often can't confront our shock and our pain directly, but we can catch through reflections and our dreams and other things, we can get a way to come at it, to start to approach it. Hades lent him his magic cap or helmet of invisibility, so Medusa wouldn't actually see him coming and attack him. And Hermes, the winged messenger of the gods, lent him his winged sandals and a sickle to be able to take her head off. In Hesiod's Theogony, one of the very the myths or books of myths from this age, he recounts how Perseus cut off the head of Medusa, and at that point from her blood sprang Chrysaor and Pegasus, which were the children of Poseidon and her having sex in Athena's temple, or from her rape. And this sets off a whole other series of myths, but Chrysaor being the golden giant with a golden, I think it was an axe or something, and Pegasus the famous white-winged horse. Right? And you can look up their stories, but what's clear is Medusa and this wounding and the toxicity that happens once that sexuality is raped or taken advantage of, becomes overwhelming, is cursed, and is then sort of numbed out and shut down and hidden away and hiding away in the wounds that's happened there too, or hiding ourselves away from society and connection. It goes toxic and the blood gets, the life force turns nasty. So here we have this head of Medusa, and Perseus is known through many tales to be carrying her head in a bag, and along his way has many adventures and turns many foes to stone. Just pulls the head out and goes, eh. So we've got Perseus going, well, I can use this and I can shock other people into submission or beating them or death, one way or the other. The wounded, toxic, turned inward, shocked, pained, numbed yin in us can get misused by the yang, by the masculine, as a way to survive, battle, and also to cause others to turn to stone. Yeah, and again, I take it back to how often they refer to toxic masculinity in Western culture. Not that I want to buy into that concept, but the piece it's talking to, I think, that's relevant here is how that yin in the men often treats the yin in the other men, and it's as this toxic Medusa. It's bad, it's evil, turn it to stone, damage it so it numbs out. Yeah, and we'll often do that to ourselves, castrate or emasculate. There's another dimension of it we'll get to. Anyway, so Perseus using Medusa, killing lots of people, including ultimately, accidentally apparently, his grandfather, as was predicted. And I like to think that, his pride of, hey, yeah, I just had this great adventure, I killed Medusa, and she comes and it, slips out of the bag, and it's like, oh, oops, I was trying to get the father's approval, but I actually killed him too with my own weapon. Anyway, another clue right there. The corals of the Red Sea were said to have been formed of Medusa's blood spilling into the seaweed when Perseus laid down the putrefying head beside the shore as he went off to get married. There's a big tale there about his marriage. After Perseus was finished with the Gorgon's head, he actually gave it to Athena, who adorned her shield and breastplate with it. And so we have breastplate, sort of the protection of the torso of the classic Greco-Roman era. So we have Athena, who's cursed Medusa and created her, getting her severed head, once it's turned into this magic, potent killing force, and actually then installing it as a protection that she would then use to go into battle with. So the mind, wisdom can use numbness and use split off, shut off, cut down as a defense.
And a breastplate, no less.
Yeah, and a breastplate, no less, across the heart, like numbing the heart, right? To be able to go and do battle, to win in the world, to achieve things. So, to this day, Medusa's head is known for its powers of protection. Not as the evil, not as the temptress, not as the beautiful maiden, not as the lost sexuality, not as but actually just this powerful protection symbol. And I don't know how to say this word, was it apotropaic amulet? No, but anyway, it means a device for warding off evil. And it's called the Gorgonion. And you'll see it, all over the place. So, from young maiden to rape or choice to engage with sexuality, to the jealousy of the older crone, to either there was abuse by the masculine or the instinctual overwhelming or going with her, to being cursed, to turning really toxic, to other people coming in and actually cutting off a head, and finally actually being the sacred protectress that's in her name. Yeah. So I said this is a really interesting, complex, multi-layered journey when you're encountering Medusa. So in astrology, in the embodied experience, particularly in embodied astrology, we often encounter first an absence of Medusa. So it's like the curious sense of not having any feeling and not having any awareness somewhere. So something that's known by its voidness or absence. And that's often reflected to us by the wholeness that's present somewhere else, in somebody else, or in a story where, I don't have anything like that going on. There's the reflection to be able to look back and go, maybe there's something there if I look. And often the first thing we'll encounter then is that terror of even looking. Yeah? And if not that, then it's simply, it might just be the numbness, because sometimes it's odd, it can sound oxymoronic, but you can feel the numbness. You know, it's like when your hand or leg have gone to sleep, you know it's gone to sleep, and you can feel the kind of weight, or there's some other impact on the total being of that numbness that's there. So there's a weighty presence to it. So wherever, you know, in your natal chart, you know, where it's placed or how it's conjunct or aspect, can indicate places where we've turned to stone, where we've numbed ourselves, or out of shock, or, you know, trauma, where we've been cursed. And parts of us psychologically have been cut off or split off. And it's like little sub-personalities that go asleep. And in transit, when Medusa's transiting something and coming conjunct, it's often surfacing that numbness into awareness, that absence into awareness. It's one of, hey, have a look here. So all of these types of numbness or woundings and shock is often by that enraged or jealous or disowned yin, that feminine. So you could think in psychological development terms, it's often the child who is young and vibrant and full of their life, and the mother who's shut down in some ways and enraged and angry and hasn't got that and needs to control the kid and get stuff done. This sort of lands pretty rough into the sort of psychically open nervous system of the child and shuts down parts of that aliveness and that sensuality and that innocent self-possession and boldness. So this wound then leads us into where we can find ourselves being used by the unhealthy masculine, or by Athena, by that wisdom mind. And we can turn against the masculine, the yang in ourselves, castrating and emasculating it in others, perhaps as a classic man-hater, or even turn it on ourselves, as I was saying, including in men. Often then an intense self-loathing, right, which is a compounded and compacted internalization of the encounter with the mother's sort of disowned or unowned jealousy and rage and hatred from their own kind of split offness from their sexuality or their aliveness and that potency. It might just be that it's a structural setup of being youthful to older, yeah, and that there is this boldness and freshness, and it gets tempered and chipped away at and dulled and wanes over time. So working with Medusa helps us first actually find that absence, that numbness, and then actually to face into it, and that's often terrifying. So that we can, in that witnessing, start to thaw the frostbite and actually feel the wounds. And as that numbness starts to sort of melt, the shock shakes through, the fear and the terror shakes through the nervous system, and then we get to the anger and the rage of what's happened to us, the wounding, the injustice, the loss of these parts of ourselves, of these innocent, sensual potencies. And we have to release this kind of toxicity, that toxic blood that's built up through that being hidden away and cursed. Yeah? Once we've taken off that enraged mask and gotten through the toxicity, we can start to actually get to the grief. And there's something about the grief that is like a thawing open of the heart, that it allows the tenderness to come back online and allows us to start welcoming home these often much younger parts of ourselves that have been, you know, split off and cut off, but are, if terrified when we meet them, actually the holders of this bold, sweet, innocent power of life force and sensuality and really guess, sexual beauty. You know. So, the protectress of the sacred feminine mysteries in all of us. And once she's then owned and conscious, we have this multi-dimensional capacity for crystal clear boundaries. My experience of this is I went from being messed with and challenged in all sorts of places in my life and myself and confused to a lot of that just drops away once you've got Medusa conscious and on board. Because it's like other beings know, oh, nope, can't fuck with them. You know? And there is this fierce protection going on. And that enables in the exquisite softness and tenderness of the sensuality to actually come back online, the sensual acuity to expand and refine. And you could also look at how it might be an opening of the subtle psychic senses and they're involved in an embodied sense, and particularly in embodied sexual, instinctual connection. That there are mysteries that open there in a multidimensional way through the physical act of sex, when there's that fullness and pleasure meeting with the instinctual nature and allowed to commune and flower together. You know, Freud, of course, has his interpretation around decapitation and the castration that happens through Medusa, and he focused on the fact that Medusa only turned men to stone, or only turned the masculine or the yang to stone. That it's this terror of Medusa and the castration is actually linked to the sight of something, right? But that it's actually related to a young boy who hasn't known, he has an unconscious fear of castration, but all might be meeting the energetic and sexual castration of the mother onto the young boy. At some point catches sight of the female genitals, often of the mother, with hair but without any outward genitals like he has. And this is so shocking, right? So this ravishingly beautiful Medusa representing the pure innocence of the mother, and then this mythic castration dawns that, oh, this is what's going to happen, right? Another one is the look at the forbidden mother, in her hair-covered genitals, so to speak, stiffens the subject in illicit desire and freezes him in terror of the father's retribution. Anyway, I think Freud always went a bit further than would hold water, but I thought it was interesting enough just to layer that in there. There's other little lenses. There's a quote here from actually a great piece on Medusa by Boots Hart. Beyond whatever else, this frightening face in the shield of wisdom tells us that the greatest wisdom isn't about mundane facts. It's about the ability to see and have revealed to us our greatest fears. Only through knowing what these are can we get past them to real acceptance of who we are. And that ultimately, that knowledge really can set us free to be like children, once again beautiful and innocent and trusting and unafraid to learn just about anything. In my experience, Medusa, Embodied Astrology, medicine wheel, literally gone from numbness, confusion about suddenly not feeling, into our overwhelming terror states, to then actually having her very real show up in the field like a subtle being apparition and hand me or reveal to me young baby or toddler parts of myself that are sort of terrified or petrified. And they're obviously frozen, right? And then actually enabling those to then go through their anger and their grief and actually experience the terror they were locked into and then come alive. And through that I've then felt a real embodied or sensual enlivenment Yeah, and I said that the boundaries then have come up as well, and I've got better boundaries. It's like those split off yang parts of me, you know, were the missing energy for healthy boundaries, as well as, if you will, the missing energy of the yin sensual aspects. Hopefully you get a sense of the quality of the fierce boundaries, that the right measures, the appropriate measures that are in her name, the protector, and then the sacred sensuality she enables. Medusa.